Good morning, my name is Kielty, and today I'll be delivering an energy resource development presentation as part of the curriculum for PCRM 654 Natural and Cultural Resources Law at Slippery Rock University. Give you a brief overview. We're going to be discussing energy resources in the United States. We're going to be studying the U.S. federal authorities over energy development. We're going to be discussing access to public lands for energy resources and purposes, fossil fuel development, renewable energy development, environmental concerns and regulations associated with all of these fuel and energy developments, as well as current challenges and the future direction of energy and development of said energy. As a way of introduction, I'm going to describe what energy resource development actually is. So, energy resource development involves the exploration, extraction, production, and management of energy resources used to power society, not just individuals within society or enterprises within society, industry, non-governmental organizations, governmental organizations, etc., but the whole of society. So we're talking major energy resources. Coal, though it has lost favor because of its pollution, disproportionate pollution contribution to the rest of the world. It is still used in much of the world. Then there's oil, which is a perennial favorite. Natural gas, uranium for use in nuclear energy, wind, solar, geothermal energy, of which Iceland is a archetypal example. Hydropower, which the Niagara Falls hydroelectric plant would be an example of. And then importance, it helps with economic growth. It actually literally powers the economy as far as all of the logistics are concerned, and as far as the administration is concerned with computerization of all resources. We also have national security concerns, transportation, electricity generation, and industrial production. So the federal authority over energy resources. The federal government manages energy development on public lands through constitutional authority and federal legislation. So the key agencies here would be the Bureau of Land Management, which is part of the Department of the Interior, as well as the U.S. Forest Service, which is also part of the Department of the Interior, and then the Department of the Interior itself, and then the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. The constitutional bases for this federal authority is found in the Property Clause of Article 4 of the Constitution, as well as the Commerce Clause. Public lands and energy development. The federal government manages approximately 640 million acres of public lands. These lands can be used for, public good, energy production, recreation, wildlife conservation, grazing for certain types of livestock, as well as timber production. The challenge here is balancing the resource extraction with environmental protection. So, for instance, if we were doing timber production in the Allegheny Mountains of the great state of Pennsylvania, that timber production would have to be properly managed, meaning not only would the resource have to be renewed as far as planting new trees, those new trees would have to be planted in a way to ensure that that area, after it was repopulated with trees, was not more susceptible to wildfire as a result of human intervention. It would also have to be environmental concerns with putting non-native plants or trees in the area. For instance, when the first waves of production came through, or timber harvesting came through the Allegheny Mountains, there were issues with cherry tree kind of taking over, right? Because it was much more prolific in the area. Even though it might have been native, it had been suppressed by the forest that was already there. Once that forest was culled, the cherry really took off and had no competitors. As a result, you were getting this very dense cherrywood forest, and that's something that has to be addressed as the kind of living management of the resource of timber production. Fossil fuel resources. The primary fossil fuels associated with current energy production is coal, oil, which is petroleum, natural gas, as well as, and the benefits of them are reliable energy sources. They're very densely powerful, they're easily accessed and easily refined. we have existing infrastructure for them, and we have tons of economic investment. Therefore, we can reap tons of economic benefits, or at least the corporations can. Concerns are the greenhouse gas production as a result of using these fuel sources, and as well as habitat destruction, air pollution, and water contamination with the byproducts of fossil fuels. Oil and gas development on public lands. Federal lands contain significant oil and gas reserves, those 640 million acres, plenty of oil and gas reserves there. The development process involves leasing through the federal government, exploration for the fossil fuel being sought, drilling, production, and reclamation. The major producing regions are Alaska, of course, their famous pipeline, most of the western United States, because it is not as heavily developed as the eastern United States, as migration, European migration and then American migration was started in the east and went westward. As a result, a lot of the western U.S. states are still unplumbed in terms of fossil fuel development, and as well as the Gulf Coast. And now we've seen for decades now the harvesting of fossil fuels from the seabed. The federal leasing system, energy companies must obtain leases before development, so they do that through the federal government. The key laws are the Mineral Leasing Act of 1920, as well as the Federal Land Policy and Management Act. The lease requirements require open competitive bidding, so they can't just award the contract to an individual based on a non-competitive appointment or offering. The environmental review, there's a lot of environmental factors that are involved in mining or drilling or any kind of harvesting of minerals or fossil fuels that have to be reviewed. Royalty payments, which are based on the actual proprietary royalties derived from these, the harvesting of these resources that must be paid back to the federal government, as well as site restoration once that fossil fuel resource is completely exhausted. And that has to do with environmental concerns to ensure that the environment has minimal harm. Environmental regulations and energy development. There's several laws that regulate energy products. That would be the National Environmental Policy Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. These are all most of these are born in the 70s and early 80s, as well as the Endangered Species Act. The purpose is to reduce environmental impacts while allowing development. So once again, we see that balance of development, but minimizing environmental impact, which must be referred to consistently in order to ensure that there's not a disproportionate harm to the environment as a result of irresponsible harvesting of these fossil fuels. Renewable energy development. So renewable energy comes from naturally replenished resources. We were discussing timber before, which is a renewable resource, but not so much for energy, even though plenty of timber is still burned for heat around the world. Major renewable resources include solar, wind, geothermal, as mentioned from what's going on in Iceland. Kind of all of their electric power is geothermal, as well as the heating of their water. The water is not filtered; it comes directly from the geothermal sources right into the homes, and it's regulated, or it's the actual temperature is regulated, so it prevents anyone from being scalded by the water. But the water itself has a very mineralic or sulfur smell to it. It's not filtered, and that heat is conserved. As a result, it's very, very inexpensive to heat homes, to power homes, and to have hot water. Hydroelectric, an example being the Niagara Falls hydroelectric station, which as those hundreds of thousands of gallons or hundreds of tons of water, hundreds of thousands of tons rather of water go over the falls every day. That potential energy is converted into electric energy. Advantages: lower emissions, right? Sustainable supply for all the parts as well as the equipment, and then a reduced dependence on fossil fuels in general, which is a good thing. Holistically good thing, because as fossil fuels are less dependent on, the demand goes down, which means the prices go down, and which means that the actual harvesting of fossil fuels are reduced, which is on the balance a plus for the environment, as well as our advancement as a global society and stewards of that environment. Solar energy on the public land. Solar energy development has expanded significantly to Western states. where they have a lot of wide open spaces and not a lot of vegetation. Benefits are low operational emissions, a large energy output. The challenges are land use conflicts, wildlife habitat impacts, just as a mining operation would have environmental impacts, covering, let's say, the Great Salt Flats of Utah with large arrays of solar panels, which would, of course, would reduce the amount of light that gets to the actual ground there, harming whatever microbes and whatever organisms live beneath it, but also the heat that's generated at that new level could also have environmental impacts. And transmission of the infrastructure needs ensuring that that power, once collected by the solar array or the solar panel, can be delivered efficiently to wherever it is needed. Major development areas: California, Nevada, and Arizona, where they all receive tons of solar power in terms of sunlight, and there's not a lot getting in the way as far as vegetation, structures, or any other kind of obstruction. Wind power is one of the fastest growing renewable energy sectors, so therefore wind energy is being developed. There are plenty of windmills, or we'll find wind energy collectors in the form of giant mills all over the Midwest. We see it being developed on the eastern seaboard to collect wind as it comes in, along with the waves from the ocean. Or I believe Michigan is also doing things with Lake Superior as well as Lake Michigan to ensure that energy resource can be collected as it occurs naturally all the time. It's clean electrical generation. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Environmental concerns are bird and bat mortality, right? The increase in damage to the bird habitat, as well as the actual threat of the spinning fan blades of the windmills being a hazard to both birds and bats or any other form of flying animal. And there's visual impacts. There's an argument to be made that says that the natural beauty of the landscape is harmed, or at least is somewhat obscured by these windmills. And then the noise concerns. They are, in fact, very noisy to operate, but as long as they're being operated in areas that are not very densely populated, that issue is not as important, given that if no one's there to hear it, whether it makes a sound or not, is kind of irrelevant. All right, on to geothermal energy. Geothermal energy uses heat from beneath the Earth's surface, and in this case, it would be magma and the heat of the core of the Earth that's kind of expanding through the Earth's crust. In the case of Iceland, it's where the continental divide, the Eurasian plate and the North American plate kind of colliding, and in a very slow motion way, and the result being all of this geothermal energy that's kind of bubbling to the surface of at that chasm between the two tectonic plates, or in this case, tectonic plating. The advantage is reliable baseload power and low emissions. It's kind of like always a resource once it's exposed, and the emissions are really, in terms of the heat, it would just be the heat pollution as a result of the heat bubbling to the surface, as well as maybe some particulate and mineralic pollution from the heat sources that are dissolved in the water. That is really the vehicle for geothermal energy. And the pressure changes as a result of heating it. The limitations limited to geographic availability. Iceland is very remote, and while they're taking care of their own energy needs, they may not be able to deliver that energy elsewhere, and there might be a lot lost as a result. And high development costs. The geothermal energy is difficult to harvest, as well as being difficult to transport, as mentioned before. Major regions: Western United States, Nevada, and California, where the similar geothermic geysers and other geothermic phenomena can be harnessed in order to do something similar to that which Iceland has done as far as sustainable energy. Balancing development and conservation. We've talked about this several times during this presentation. Major challenge in natural resource law is balancing energy needs with economic growth, national energy security, as well as job creation. And then in terms of environmental protection, we have biodiversity conservation, air and water quality, safeguarding, as well as recreational opportunities for areas that, if they're dedicated to energy production, may not be safe for people to use recreationally, or not as pleasing to the eye, or not as enjoyable for lack of the biodiversity and kind of the environmental impact of that being somewhat deleterious as a result of the production. So we have a wind energy and wildlife case study. The issue is wind turbines may impact birds and bats, which we've discussed before, just as a physical hazard. Legal question is, how should wildlife impacts be evaluated? Legal questions include that, as well as what mitigation measures are appropriate. Generally, the outcomes are federal agencies are increasingly requiring environmental assessments, wildlife monitoring, as well as adaptive management strategies. If we know, for instance, that the bats are going to migrate at night, and there's a specific path they usually take, those windmills that find themselves in that path, if they can't be located elsewhere, can be turned off during that period, and as a result, the environmental impact can be abated or mitigated. As far as solar development in desert ecosystems, case study, the issue, the large-scale solar projects may affect sensitive desert habitats, as we mentioned before, the Great Salt Flats of Utah. If there's a huge solar array out there, a lot of that the energy from the sun that would have otherwise struck that ground and would have sustained life in whatever form that exists there would be disrupted and be kind of cast into shadows, and the long-term environmental impacts of that, if there's some organism that's keeping the erosion at bay by being in the salt flats, may result in erosion or kind of a destruction of that land in that way. It could result in additional damage that was unanticipated for the solar array, and may increase costs, which no one would want. The concerns, the habitat fragmentation, species protection, as well as water usage, right? If we're rerouting water systems, that could, as far as riparian, in terms of riparian effects on the desert soil, which isn't getting much water to begin with, that could be problematic. Lessons learned, site planning is critical, so we want to go as deeply as the knowledge will take us as far as what to do, and in the front end, rather than trying to mitigate. So, and the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, definitely applies to this situation. In addition, environmental review remains essential. We have to continue to monitor the environment and update our plans according to the changes we do see, whether they were anticipated or unanticipated. Current issues in energy development. There's an ongoing debates about climate change policy, with the greenhouse gases being a problem for overall global warming and climate change. Public land leasing, which is done through the federal government, and in terms of the most benefit for the person leasing it, as well as the governmental agency receiving those proceeds and using them appropriately. Renewable energy expansion, whether that will impact the public lands that we discussed before in a new, unanticipated way. Energy independence for us nationally, as well as for states, where these developments can occur, and then environmental justice, ensuring that whatever is ultimately decided is fair and equitable to the environment, to ensure that whatever environmental conditions exist, they're preserved to the greatest degree practicable, and that are whatever natural progression is occurring is not interfered with. In addition, emerging technologies, we have the energy storage capability, which would be critically important for all of these systems, especially geothermic, if they could figure out a way to make sure that energy is stored in an efficient manner, as well as carbon capture, the continuing burning of fossil fuels. If there's a way to lock that carbon into something that's carbon on the ground rather than carbon in the air and in the water in the form of CO2 or carbon monoxide or any other carbon-based gas or liquid, that would be critical, as well as advanced geothermic systems, really removing any other additional steep prohibitive costs, and being able to really get all of that power to where it needed to go. And we mentioned offshore wind development across the eastern seaboard, which continues to be both an environmental and, I guess, an aesthetic concern, as well as noise pollution for anybody who would be presumably boating or enjoying an island off the coast of the East Coast, say near the Jersey Shore, or further south in North Carolina near the near the Outer Banks. The key takeaways from this presentation are energy development is essential for modern society. We are very energy dependent, and the vehicle of that energy, or the nature of that energy, is very important to ensure that our dependency is not exploited and does not override our interest in maintaining healthy environments. Federal agencies play a major role in managing public lands and will for the foreseeable future, and well-informed federal agency abiding by very routinely updated policies can really do a great job of ensuring efficiency as well as a balance between that development and conservation. Laws and regulations attempt to balance economic development with an energy production with environmental protection, and the renewable energy is becoming increasingly important for future resource management. I think it's kind of always been important, and us getting better at this process is a win-win-win all the way down the line. So discussion questions. Should renewable energy projects receive priority access to public lands over fossil fuel developments? The fossil fuel development can continue. I do believe that a prioritization of renewable energy, if they're competing for the same space, would be very important, or if they don't have offsetting environmental impacts, if they have duplicative or cumulative environmental impacts, that's a big concern. And as a result, the least kind of a triage of many factors needs to take place. We have to ensure that the environmental impact is not disproportionate with fossil fuels versus renewable energy, as well as the aesthetic concerns, maybe in terms of say windmills or wind energy being harvested, as in addition to other factors, are all contemplated and added into whatever formula that makes this in a mechanism that helps and aid in this decision making. This is not a kind of a binary decision, yes fossil fuels or yes renewable fuels over the other. It's the sum total of the factors involved and the concerns for the outcomes, both in terms of economic development and environmental protection. How should federal agencies balance energy production with wildlife conservation? Once again, the energy production, to the degree that it has the most minimal impact or minimized impact, should continue so long as the planning is drilled down, pardon the pun, deeply enough to ensure that the wildlife conservation is achievable and sustainable. Otherwise, it can become just a mad money grab that fails to recognize the value and importance of environmental safeguarding for future generations, as well as for just maintaining a livable global climate. So here's a list of all the references that were used in the development of this presentation. These slides will be submitted along with this video for the completion of this assignment. If you have any questions, I can be reached at this location, by this number, and by this email. I want to thank you for your time and your attention, and I hope you have a marvelous day.